500 cattle are dying because of me and I feel no remorse. Karen called Henry at 500 a.m., her voice breaking through the crackling phone line. Please. Henry, I'll do anything, just save them. But Henry simply took another sip of his coffee, standing quietly beside the new well where clear, cold water was gushing, his eyes fixed on Crystal Lake as the Texas sunrise turned the water to gold. The surface remained calm, unbothered, much like Henry's heart, hardened by years of watching droughts claim harvests, of seeing people come and go, of understanding how the land teaches you to value every drop of water like it's worth more than gold. This story didn't start the day Karen begged for mercy. It started the day she made a fatal mistake calling him a small-time farmer who doesn't matter. That was the moment the cracks began to form in Karen's million-dollar dairy empire. And it was the moment a quiet farmer invisible to many for 38 years, decided to reclaim the power Karen had forgotten he possessed. The power to control the water she needed to survive. Henry had grown up on this land, watching fish swim under the lake's surface, feeling the dry Texas wind sweep across the parched fields, and learning from his grandfather, water is life, Henry, and only those who respect it deserve to have it. Karen never understood that. Or maybe she chose to forget. When she went from being a neighbor needing water, to becoming the dairy queen of 3 counties, boasting 500 cattle, signing million-dollar contracts, flashing confident smiles on the front pages of local newspapers, wearing boots that cost more than Henry's monthly income. Meanwhile, for 20 years, Henry quietly let her draw water from his portion of the lake at a laughably low rate, believing in being a good neighbor, believing in community over profit. But even the calmest waters have limits. When the worst drought in 50 years hit, Karen didn't ask Henry for help. Instead, she aligned with the HOA, banning Henry from drilling a well, threatening him with hefty fines, all while continuing to drain his water to keep her empire alive. While Henry watched his own crops wither under the scorching sun, Karen thought she could control everything. She thought power came from money and connections. But she forgot one simple truth: that lake was not hers, and Henry was no longer the quiet farmer she could push around. 500 cattle are dying because of me, and I feel no remorse. Because when greed and arrogance cross the line, justice requires someone to stand up and reclaim what's rightfully theirs. This time, that someone was Henry. Karen always believed she was untouchable. In her mind, she was the queen of the county, the savior of the local economy, the woman who turned a modest ranch into a sprawling empire of 500 dairy cattle, employing dozens, moving millions in contracts, and earning respect, or rather fear, from everyone around her. And for a while, Henry let her believe it. Henry had lived on this land for 38 years, waking before dawn, feeling the cold dirt under his boots as he walked the fence lines, checking the crops, mending what needed fixing. His family had worked this soil since 1952, when his grandfather made what people thought was a strange purchase, at the time 50 acres of rolling Texas hills, and with it, 20% ownership of Crystal Lake, including full mineral and water rights to the eastern shore. Most people back then didn't think much about water rights. Water was plentiful, lakes were full, and no one imagined a time when it would become the most valuable resource in the county. But Henry's grandfather was no ordinary man. Water is life, Henry, his grandfather told him, sitting on the porch, spitting tobacco into a tin can as the Texas sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. And someday, people will understand just how much power that gives you. Those words, once distant, now rang clear in Henry's mind as he watched the drought turn the once green fields into brown dust, as rivers dried to cracked mud, and as Crystal Lake shrank lower each day under the relentless sun. But Karen had never cared about the lake's true owner. 20 years ago, when she was just starting, she came to Henry with her hat in her hands, asking for water for her 500-head cattle operation. Henry, valuing community over profit, offered her a laughably low rental agreement so she could draw water from his portion of the lake. Karen's herd grew, her business grew, and so did her pride. She started buying up land around the county, putting in massive irrigation systems, expanding her empire while paying Henry the same low rate they agreed upon decades ago. Henry never complained, never raised the price. He believed in being a good neighbor. That was his first mistake. His second mistake, believing that as Karen's wealth grew, so would her gratitude. But gratitude didn't grow in Karen's empire. Only arrogance did. When the drought hit, Henry made a simple, survival-driven decision to drill a well on his own land, tapping into the underground aquifer beneath his property to save his crops. But before the drill even reached water, the HOA led by Victoria Sterling, a woman who treated HOA meetings like royal courts, showed up with a cease and desist order, citing aesthetic standards and property value concerns. Karen was there too, stepping out of her big Ford truck in boots that cost more than Henry's entire monthly grocery bill. Her Stetson hat shaded her cold eyes as she looked Henry up and down, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Henry, we need to talk about this well situation." Henry wiped the sweat from his brow, arms crossed, the Texas dust caking his jeans. "What's there to talk about, Karen? I need water for my crops." She scoffed, tilting her head with a smirk. "Henry, I have 500 cattle that need water every single day. Your little vanity project is threatening the water table for all of us." A vanity project. The words burned hotter than the sun overhead. She stood there confident, flanked by Victoria and the AOA's legal threats, convinced that her connections, her status, her wealth, would bend Henry like it had bent so many others before him. "Actually, Karen," Henry said quietly, his eyes never leaving hers, "in case you've forgotten, you don't own the lake. You rent water rights from me." She laughed in ugly, sharp sound that turned heads. "Henry, I've been paying you pennies for 20 years. I'm the economic engine of this county, and you're just a small-time farmer. My operation employs 50 people, generates millions in revenue. What do you contribute?" What did Henry contribute? Water. The one thing Karen needed, the one thing she had taken for granted, the one thing she believed she controlled because she had wealth and connections. Victoria stepped in, her voice dripping with that polished authority Henry had come to despise. "Henry, the HOA has made its decision. Continue drilling, and you'll face 50 zalozen in fines and legal action." They thought they had him cornered, that he would fold, that he would crawl back and beg for forgiveness. They didn't know Henry. They didn't know about the old filing cabinet in his office, labeled "Important, keep forever," filled with deeds, mineral rights, water rights, and surveys dating back to 1952. They didn't know that Crystal Lake's eastern shore was not community property but Henry's family property, with exclusive riparian rights. They didn't know that Henry had already begun installing monitoring equipment to track water extraction from his portion of the lake, and what he discovered shattered the illusion Karen had carefully built, under the cover of darkness. Karen's trucks had been drawing thousands of gallons beyond what their agreement allowed, selling stolen water to other ranches for enormous profit. Henry returned home that day, shaking with anger, but there was no fear, only clarity. Karen's empire was built on stolen water, and she had forgotten who she stole it from. Henry sat in his office that night, the old documents spread across his desk under the dim light, the crickets chirping outside, the heat still lingering in the air. Every piece of paper, every recorded water reading, every photograph of Karen's trucks under moonlight, every receipt of water sales to other ranches, told a clear story. It was time to remind Karen who truly held the power. The next day, as Henry loaded the briefcase with these documents, he glanced out at the lake one last time before heading to the HOA meeting. The water was low, but it was still there, shimmering in the sun, a reminder of the quiet power his family had guarded for generations. Karen thought she was the queen of the county, but water is life. And Henry was the one who controlled the water. That morning, Henry stepped into the community meeting hall, a place usually reserved for HOA arguments over fence colors and sidewalk flowers. But today, the air was different, heavy, charged, like the sky before a Texas thunderstorm. Word had spread fast. People packed the room, standing against the walls, whispering among themselves. They had heard how Henry was being threatened by Karen and the HOA, forced to stop drilling his well during the worst drought in 50 years. They had heard whispers that while small farmers were forced to cull herds or sell livestock at a loss because of water shortages, Karen's empire of 500 cattle kept thriving. They didn't know the whole story yet, but they would soon. At the front, Victoria Sterling stood with her crisp white blouse and silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her presence radiating that carefully maintained authority she had wielded for years over the community. Next to her, Karen stood tall, boots polished, expensive blazer sharp, chin lifted, eyes cold with the confidence of someone used to getting her way. "We are here today," Victoria's voice echoed through the hall, "to address the violation of HOA regulations regarding unauthorized well drilling by Mr. Henry." She paused, letting the word, violation, hang in the air like a threat, branding Henry as a lawbreaker, an outlier in a community that valued order and compliance. Henry walked forward, a worn leather briefcase in his hand, eyes calm as they swept across familiar faces in the crowd. Some people looked away, ashamed for the silence they had kept. Others met his gaze, nodding subtly, offering quiet support. A few just watched, waiting to see what would happen. He placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out a stack of documents, placing them neatly, deliberately, in front of Victoria. "Before we talk about what I can and cannot do on my land," Henry's voice was steady, each word deliberate, "let's talk about ownership and the truth." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that thickens the air, that makes people lean forward without realizing it. Henry lifted an old, yellowed document, the red county seal still visible despite the decades. This is the deed to my family's land from 1952. It includes 20% of Crystal Lake's eastern shoreline, along with full mineral and water rights. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Victoria's expression cracked for a moment. Karen's jaw tightened, her hand clutching the edge of her designer handbag. Henry placed another thick stack of papers on the table. These are monitoring reports from the past 6 months, documenting water extraction from my portion of the lake. Here are photographs of tanker trucks drawing water in the dead of night, beyond the amounts agreed upon, and these. He lifted another set of papers. Invoices showing those trucks selling stolen water to other ranches for profit. He turned his eyes to Karen, letting the silence grow heavy. For 6 months, you've been stealing hundreds of thousands from my lake, while paying me pennies. You built your empire on water you had no right to take. Gasps and angry whispers exploded across the room. Samuel, a small rancher who had purchased water from Karen at exorbitant prices, stood up, his face flushed. Karen, you told us it was your excess water. We took out loans to pay for that water while you were stealing it from Henry. Karen opened her mouth, but Henry held up a hand stopping her. I'm not finished. He pulled out one final document, printed, signed, and stamped. Effective midnight tonight, I am terminating the water rental agreement with Karen. From that moment on, she will have no legal right to take even a single drop from my portion of Crystal Lake. The room was frozen, the weight of those words sinking in. Karen's voice broke the silence, sharp, desperate. You can't do that, Henry. I have 500 cattle that need water every day. You'll kill them. I'll sue you. I'll bury you in court. Henry's eyes were calm, his voice steady, cutting through her threats like a blade. Karen, you've had 20 years to pay fair rates, 20 years to honor agreements, 20 years to act with integrity. You chose greed. Karen lunged forward, her face red, eyes wild, reaching for the documents in Henry's hands, but a security guard stepped between them, gently but firmly holding her back. Victoria's voice was unsteady now, the facade of authority crumbling. Henry, perhaps we can negotiate. We can't let those animals die. We can't let this ruin the local economy. Henry turned to face the community, looking into the eyes of the small farmers, the shopkeepers, the workers who had all lived under Karen's shadow, paying high prices for stolen water. Fearing her influence. Victoria, if you cared about this community, you wouldn't have allowed Karen to steal water from me while exploiting these people. He closed his briefcase with finality. I'm not killing anyone, Karen. Your greed is killing your empire. The Karen stood frozen, her face pale, eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally, finding none. For the first time, the queen of the county realized she was alone. As Henry turned to leave, the silence was broken by the sound of a single person clapping. Then another. Then the room erupted in applause, not just for Henry, but for the truth, for the courage to stand up to power, for the reminder that respect and integrity still mattered. Henry stepped out into the harsh Texas sunlight, the heat washing over him, the wind carrying the smell of dust and dry grass. For the first time in years, his shoulders felt lighter. The battle had just begun. Karen would not give up easily. She would send lawyers, call in political favors, do everything she could to reclaim the water she thought she owned. But Henry was ready. He was done being silent, done being the good neighbor, done allowing greed to rule his community. He had waited 20 years for this moment. The sun was setting over Crystal Lake, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, when Henry returned to his porch after the explosive HOA meeting. Duke, his old Labrador, trotted to greet him. Sensing the heaviness in Henry's steps, the exhaustion beneath the quiet triumph, Henry sat heavily in his creaking rocking chair, the Texas breeze warm against his weathered face, as he looked out over the lake that had caused so much turmoil. The lake that had quietly made him the most powerful man in the county. It was quiet now, but Henry knew the calm wouldn't last. Inside his old farmhouse, a single lamp illuminated the documents spread across the dining table. Deeds, survey maps, water rights certificates, and most importantly photographs. Photographs that had changed everything. Months earlier, Henry had noticed the lake's level dropping faster than any drought could explain. At first, he blamed evaporation under the relentless Texas sun. But his gut told him something else was wrong. He remembered his grandfather's words, "Trust the land, Henry, but verify it too." So, Henry did what Karen never expected. He installed discreet motion, triggered cameras near the access roads to his side of the lake, placing water meters on the main pipelines, feeding into Karen's operation. It was a gamble that cost him nights of crawling in the dirt, hours studying water levels, and more money than he wanted to admit. But it paid off. The first photos were blurry, but the shapes were unmistakable tanker trucks, with Karen Farms logos, pulling up to the lake at midnight, hoses snaking into the water, engines rumbling under the cover of darkness. The timestamps showed the truth. These weren't occasional late night hauls during emergencies. They were systematic thefts, 3 to 4 times a week, each truck taking thousands of gallons. Henry flipped through the photos again, pausing at the one where Karen herself stood by the trucks, clipboard in hand, signing off as her workers filled tank after tank with water they weren't paying for. Her face was lit by the headlights, a look of casual confidence as she turned away from the camera, unaware that this single image would become her undoing. But the theft was only part of the betrayal. Through a public records request and quiet conversations with people in the county clerk's office, Henry discovered invoices tied to Karen Farms. She wasn't just stealing water to sustain her herd. She was reselling it at a premium to other struggling ranchers in the county. Ranchers who were desperate to keep their cattle alive during the drought. Water that cost Karen pennies was being sold for hundreds of dollars per truckload, each sale adding to the fortune she had built on Henry's goodwill. Henry felt anger simmering again, low and hot in his chest. All those years, he had watched Karen's operation expand. New barns, shiny trucks, bigger pastures. While she smiled politely at him, handed over the same meager check each month, and spoke about community. All the while, she was building an empire on stolen water while letting small farmers go bankrupt, forcing them to sell their land, which Karen then bought at a fraction of its worth. Henry's phone buzzed on the table, snapping him from the anger. It was a message from Samuel, the rancher who had shouted at Karen during the HOA meeting. "Henry, I checked our invoices. She charged us $500 a truckload. We thought we were buying city water. I had to sell half my herd to afford it." Henry closed his eyes, gripping the phone, feeling the weight of what Karen had done to people like Samuel, to the community that had trusted her. Karen had underestimated him, thinking of him as a quiet old farmer, content to be overlooked. But now she had made it personal, and in doing so, she had awakened something in Henry that even he didn't know was there. A quiet, unyielding resolve to see justice served. The next morning, the news had already begun to spread. Local gossip moved faster than any formal news report. By dawn, people at the diner were whispering about how Karen had been stealing water. By noon, the local feed store was buzzing with rumors that she had been reselling that water at extortionate prices. And by evening, a local blogger had published an article, using the photographs Henry had anonymously provided, detailing exactly how Karen's trucks had stolen water under cover of night. Karen's carefully crafted image as the benevolent Dairy Queen of the county was shattering in real time. Calls began flooding Henry's phone, reporters wanting quotes, ranchers wanting to know if they could buy water from him directly, neighbors calling to apologize for doubting him. Henry answered none of them. Instead, he focused on his next step. He knew Karen wouldn't give up. People like her never did. She would call in lawyers, threaten lawsuits, claim ignorance, or paint herself as the victim of a smear campaign. She would leverage every politician she had donated to, every favor she had banked, every ounce of influence she had built to protect her empire. But Karen had made one fatal miscalculation. She had underestimated Henry's patience and preparation. 2 days later, Henry received a notice from a high-powered law firm representing Karen Farms, demanding that he cease his defamation campaign, and threatening to sue him for damages if he did not retract his statements and destroy the evidence. Henry read the letter twice, then calmly placed it in a folder labeled, "Karen Lawsuit." He smiled, shaking his head at the audacity. He walked outside, Duke at his side, and watched the workers finishing the installation of the irrigation system, connected to his newly drilled well. The water from the well was pure, cold, and plentiful. Enough to sustain his crops and provide surplus water for neighbors who needed it. Henry called Samuel. "I'll sell you water, Sam, but at a fair price. Enough to keep your herd alive until the rains return. No markup, no theft, no lies." There was silence on the other end, then Samuel's voice, thick with emotion. "Henry, you don't know what this means for us." "Thank you." That night, Karen herself called. Her voice was brittle, trying to sound composed but cracking under the pressure. "Henry, we need to talk." Henry said nothing, letting the silence stretch until Karen continued. "This has gotten out of hand. We can come to an agreement for the sake of the community." Henry's voice was quiet, firm. "You're right, Karen. It's for the sake of the community that I won't let you steal from it anymore." She started to argue, but Henry hung up, walking back to the table, staring at the photographs again. Karen had built her empire on water she did not own, on a foundation of theft and greed. Now her empire was crumbling, and Henry knew it was only the beginning. The secret was out. Karen's trucks had stolen water under the cover of darkness. She had sold that water while pretending to care about the community. She had tried to silence Henry, but instead, she had given him the resolve to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Henry took a deep breath, looking out over Crystal Lake, watching the moonlight dance on the water. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace, knowing that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. The water was his, and now, the power was too. That morning, the Texas sky was heavy with gray clouds, hanging low over Crystal Lake like a warning. People streamed into the community center, packing every seat, leaning against the walls, crowding the hallways. The air was thick with heat, sweat, and the unspoken tension of people who had come not out of curiosity, but because they were tired of silently enduring injustice. Today wasn't a regular HOA meeting. Today, the entire community was here to hear the truth about Karen. Henry sat quietly in the back row, his wide, brimmed hat shading his steady eyes. In front of him were familiar faces: Samuel from the farm across the lake, Mrs. Wilson from the local grocery, Tom from the feed store, and dozens of small farmers who had struggled through the drought, forced to pay outrageous prices for water or sell off cattle just to survive. They were here because they had heard whispers of what Henry had discovered. At the front, Dr. James Miller, the elderly doctor newly appointed as interim HOA president after Victoria Sterling's resignation, stepped to the podium, adjusting his papers, clearing his throat. "We are gathered here today to address the water crisis impacting our entire community, and the revelations that have recently come to light." His voice was calm, clear, unwavering. Karen entered with two lawyers at her side, her face pale and drawn. The once impeccable hair and confident smile were gone, replaced by dark circles under her eyes, and the restless shifting of someone who knew the tide was turning. When her eyes swept the room, the people who once feared her looked away, or worse, looked directly at her with cold, accusing stares. Karen lowered her gaze, clutching her designer handbag like a lifeline. Henry remained still, gripping his hat in his calloused hands, eyes fixed on the front. Dr. Miller continued, "Mr. Henry has requested to present documents to the community today regarding land and water ownership, as well as recent revelations of unauthorized water extraction." Henry stood, his boots thudding softly on the wooden floor as he walked to the podium, carrying his worn leather briefcase, the same briefcase his father once carried to town meetings, filled now with the weight of truth and the promise of justice. He opened it slowly, placing deeds from 1952, maps showing the family's portion of Crystal Lake, legal documents confirming his family's water rights in a neat stack on the table. Then, he held up the photograph. Karen, standing by the lake in the dead of night, clipboard in hand, smiling faintly as she signed off on another illegal water draw, illuminated by truck headlights. "This is Karen, supervising her trucks as they draw thousands of gallons of water from my lake, under the cover of darkness." Henry moved through the photos one by one, each image a blow: Karen's tankers at midnight, hoses plunging into the water, meters showing thousands of gallons extracted, evidence of systematic theft. "Here are the water meter readings I recorded over 6 months, showing the water being taken. 10 times the volume she was paying for." Henry lifted another sheaf of papers. "And here are the invoices, showing Karen reselling that stolen water to ranchers in this very room, at 5 times the fair price, while many of you sold cattle, or went into debt to buy what you believed was legally sourced water." The room fell into a suffocating silence. The ceiling fans whirred, the air thick with the weight of betrayal, the rustle of papers sounding like thunder in the silence. Henry scanned the crowd, locking eyes with Samuel as he stood, fists clenched. "Karen, you told us it was surplus water, that you were helping us." Mrs. Wilson rose, her voice trembling with fury. "I took out a loan to pay for that water, Karen. I trusted you." Karen's face drained of color, her hands shaking. Henry turned his gaze to Karen, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "You didn't just steal water from me, Karen. You stole hope from the people in this room. You built your empire on theft and the suffering of your neighbors." Karen stammered, "Henry, I did it to keep my business afloat, to keep people employed. One of her lawyers stepped forward, voice cold. "Mr. Henry, we demand you cease these slanderous accusations or we will pursue legal action." Henry didn't even look at the lawyer. His eyes remained on Karen. "Karen, hire as many lawyers as you want, but the truth doesn't change." He turned to the community. "This lake doesn't belong to Karen or to the HOA. It belongs to my family and has since 1952. I stayed quiet for 20 years, believing in neighborliness and trust. I was wrong." He paused, drawing in a steady breath. "Today I am announcing that all water access from my portion of the lake for Karen Farms is terminated. As of now, not one drop will be taken." A small gasp of the room before Karen erupted, her voice shrill with panic. "You'll kill 500 cattle, Henry! You'll destroy the economy of this county!" "You don't have the right." Henry's eyes sharpened. "Karen, your greed is what's killing your cattle. Not me." Samuel shouted, "Karen, your greed has hurt us all." Mrs. Wilson's voice cracked. "You used us while pretending to help us." the room exploded with noise. Shouting, angry voices, the sound of years of suppressed frustration finally breaking free. Karen stood frozen, clutching the edge of the table, face pale, lips trembling, realizing that the fear she once commanded had turned into disgust and anger. Dr. Miller raised his hands, calling for order. Please, everyone, let's remain calm. It is clear Mr. Henry has brought evidence, not accusations. Our community has to change. He turned to Henry. Henry, what do you propose we do now? Henry looked out at the exhausted faces, the eyes of people who had struggled and been humiliated, who had once looked to Karen as their only option. He spoke with quiet resolve. I am creating a community water cooperative. I will use my well and my rights on Crystal Lake to supply water to the farmers here at fair prices, ensuring no one is ever forced to beg or go into debt for water again. No theft, no exploitation. A heavy silence settled, followed by a single clap, then another. Soon, the entire room was on its feet, clapping and cheering, the sound rising like a wave, drowning out the spinning ceiling fans and the last desperate gasps of Karen's crumbling empire. Karen stood alone, tears streaking down her carefully made-up face, realizing that the empire she had built on stolen water and false goodwill was collapsing around her. Henry stepped down from the podium, shaking hands with farmers, neighbors, and people who, for the first time in years, felt hope return. He turned to Karen one last time, his voice calm, final. This isn't revenge, Karen. This is justice. The days following the community meeting moved like a storm over the county, sweeping away the remnants of Karen's carefully crafted image and leaving behind a brutal, unfiltered reality. Word traveled faster than the Texas wind. By sunrise the next morning, local radio hosts were discussing the scandal, reading Henry's documentation live on air. By noon the local newspaper had printed the front page headline, Water Theft Scandal Community Betrayed by Karen Wellington. Photos of Karen standing by her trucks at midnight, clipboard in hand, were splashed across the internet, shared in local Facebook groups, forwarded in text messages between neighbors who had once believed in her, who had once trusted her. But now, trust was gone. Karen tried to respond with damage control. She released a shaky video, filmed in her office, her hair hastily tied back, eyes red from sleepless nights. I never meant to harm anyone, she said, voice trembling. I was trying to keep my employees paid, to keep the county economy alive during a drought. But it was too late. Comments flooded in under the video. You stole from us. You made us beg for water while you sold it. Your greed cost us everything. It wasn't just social media outrage. The betrayal had financial consequences that Karen was unprepared to face. The next day, Henry received a call from Samuel. Henry, you should see this. He sent a photo lines of trucks outside Karen Farms, ranchers demanding refunds, workers demanding their unpaid wages, bank representatives delivering foreclosure notices. The sheriff's department parked nearby, maintaining order as Karen's managers tried to calm the angry crowd. Inside the office, Karen was pacing, her lawyer whispering furiously, showing her documents she could barely read as her vision blurred with tears. All the power Karen once held, the influence, the fear, the silent control, was crumbling, replaced by chaos. Meanwhile, the drought continued to tighten its grip on the land, the sun merciless in the Texas sky. The fields around Karen's property turned from brown to gray as the grass died, leaving dust clouds swirling around her once green empire. Karen had relied entirely on stolen water to sustain her 500 cattle. Without it, the troughs were empty within 2 days. Cattle began to cluster around the dry water tanks, bellowing in hunger and thirst, their cries echoing through the valley in a haunting, desperate chorus. At first, Karen tried to truck in water from the city, but the city's emergency supply was limited, and officials refused to continue supplying water for a private operation in the middle of a theft scandal. This is murder. Karen screamed into the phone at city officials. You're killing my cattle. But the officials only responded coldly. We don't supply water to criminals, Ms. Wellington. Desperation set in. Karen's workers quit one by one, unwilling to stay on a sinking ship. Suppliers canceled contracts, milk processors cut ties, and her largest buyers pulled out, citing ethical concerns. In a last-ditch effort, Karen attempted to sell a portion of her cattle, but news of the water crisis had spread, and no buyer wanted dehydrated, underfed animals. The offers that came were humiliatingly low, buyers circling like vultures, waiting for Karen to break. And she did. Henry was on his porch, Duke resting at his feet, when Karen's truck pulled into the driveway, dust rising in the hot wind. She stepped out, her clothes wrinkled, hair unkempt, and face drawn with exhaustion. She stood there for a long moment, gathering the courage to speak, her hands shaking. Henry, please. I need your help. Henry looked at her, his expression unreadable. What do you need, Karen? A tears welled in her eyes. The cattle, they're dying. I've already lost over 500. The rest will die in days if I don't get water. I know I was wrong. I know I took advantage. But these animals don't deserve to die for my mistakes. Please, I'll do anything." For a long moment, the only sounds were the wind and the distant, dry rustle of dying grass. Henry looked past Karen, toward the land, remembering the times he had watched her trucks steal water under the cover of darkness, the payments she made with a sneer, the times she dismissed him as a small-time farmer. He remembered the nights he stayed up, planning how to protect what was his, and the moment he decided enough was enough. But he also saw the desperation in Karen's eyes, the collapse of a woman who had thought she was untouchable. "Karen, you brought this on yourself." Her voice cracked, a sob escaping her lips. "Please. For the animals. Not for me." Henry sighed, feeling the weight of decades pressing on his shoulders. He had every right to refuse her, to let the consequences of her greed play out to the end. But the cattle were innocent. "I've already contacted the Humane Society," Henry said quietly. "They'll be here tomorrow to take the remaining cattle. They will be given to small farms that can care for them properly, to sanctuaries that will ensure they survive." Karen collapsed to her knees, sobbing, clutching the dust in her fists. "Thank you, thank you." Henry shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank the community you betrayed, because it's them who will feed and water these cattle now." That night, a convoy of Humane Society trucks and trailers arrived at Karen's farm, loading the dehydrated, exhausted cattle with care. The cries of the animals quieted as they were given water for the first time in days. Neighbors watched from the road, some shaking their heads, others silently mourning the destruction Karen's greed had caused. Karen stood in the dust, watching as her herd was driven away, the final piece of her empire leaving with them. She turned to Henry, who had come to oversee the transfer, standing by his truck, arms folded. "Is there any way back from this, Henry?" she whispered. Henry looked at her, the woman who once held the county in the palm of her hand, now stripped of everything. "That's not for me to decide, Karen," he replied. "You'll have to find that answer yourself." The next morning, news trucks lined the roads near Crystal Lake, filming the aftermath. Reporters spoke about the collapse of Karen Wellington, the water theft, the community that had reclaimed its dignity, and the small farmer who had quietly become a hero. Henry refused interviews, declining microphones and cameras, choosing instead to walk the fence lines of his farm, inspecting his crops that were now green and thriving thanks to the well he had fought to drill. At the edge of Crystal Lake, Henry stood, watching the water shimmer under the morning sun, a reminder that what truly matters isn't power or money, but respect for the land, for the community, for the people who depend on honesty. That evening, at the community center, Henry met with local farmers, establishing the new water cooperative. Papers were signed, agreements made, promises exchanged that water would never again be used as a weapon against them. Samuel approached Henry after the meeting, gripping his hand firmly. "You saved us, Henry." Henry simply nodded. "No, Sam, we saved each other." As Henry left the community center, the sky was streaked with the pink of sunset, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the oaks by the road. Behind him, the community was no longer afraid, no longer powerless, no longer beholden to the greed of one person. In front of him lay the quiet promise of a future rebuilt on fairness and trust, with water flowing freely to those who needed it, not to those who sought to hoard it. And for the first time in decades, Henry felt truly at peace, knowing justice had finally returned to Crystal Lake. Samuel spoke up, his voice steady but emotional. "For years, we thought we didn't have a choice. That we had to pay whatever was asked, or lose everything. I sold half my herd to pay for stolen water. I thought I was alone. But I wasn't." Others nodded, their eyes meeting in silent agreement. Mrs. Wilson, her hands clasped tightly, added, "Henry, you reminded us that we deserve better. That we can stand up for ourselves." The Henry simply nodded. "No one will ever have to beg for water in this community again." The cooperative structure was simple and fair, each farm could access water based on need, with transparent, metered usage. Prices were set at fair market rates, not inflated to exploit desperation. Funds would be pooled to maintain the well and expand infrastructure, ensuring sustainability. Every member had a vote, regardless of the size of their farm. Henry handed out papers detailing the system, explaining each point patiently, answering every question with calm, practical clarity. A young farmer, barely in his 20s, raised his hand. "Henry, what happens if someone tries to take more than their share again?" Henry met the young man's eyes. "Then we handle it together. As a community." In the days that followed, water began to flow not just to Henry's fields, but to Samuel's, to Mrs. Wilson's small vegetable plots, to dozens of small ranches that had once struggled in Karen's shadow. Cattle that had been at risk of dehydration were seen drinking deeply from freshly filled troughs. Crops that had begun to wither in the heat stood tall, green, and alive. The sounds of quiet hope replaced the silence of fear. For the first time in years, trucks at the feed store lined up not to buy overpriced water, but to pick up feed for cattle that would survive another season. But it wasn't just water that began to flow. Conversations began to flow again, too. Neighbors who had avoided each other out of fear of crossing Karen now talked openly about planning schedules, about new ideas for managing drought, about building a cooperative hay supply to reduce costs. Henry found himself busier than ever, but it was a different kind of busy. He was advising on irrigation systems, helping install meters, teaching younger farmers how to track water use and manage resources sustainably. One evening, after a long day of helping a neighboring ranch set up their new water lines, Henry stood by Crystal Lake, watching the sunset paint the water gold. Duke, his loyal dog, sat beside him, tail thumping gently on the ground. Henry took a deep breath, the air filled with the scent of grass and warm earth, and for the first time in a long while, he felt the land breathing with him. Karen was gone now, her property seized in bankruptcy, the fields left empty, the barns silent. The empire she had built on stolen water and fear was no more. Some people asked Henry if he felt pity for her, if he felt satisfaction in seeing her fall. Henry would only say, "I don't feel joy in anyone's suffering, but I do feel peace in seeing justice done." As summer rolled on, the cooperative grew stronger. The well Henry had fought to drill continued to produce, sustaining not just him, but an entire community ready to stand on its own feet. Henry's home became a quiet hub for the cooperative's activities. Meetings were held on his porch, where coffee was poured into mugs as plans were made for water rotation, drought strategies, and shared equipment purchases. The spirit that Karen had nearly crushed with her greed was alive again, stronger, braver, and wiser. One evening, Samuel stayed back after a meeting, looking out at the lake with Henry. "You know, Henry," he said, "my father used to tell me that water doesn't belong to anyone, but we belong to the water." Henry nodded, understanding. "That's the truth, Sam. Water is life. It deserves respect." And they stood there quietly, watching the ripples on Crystal Lake, the water reflecting the stars that had begun to appear in the wide Texas sky. They didn't need to say more. They both knew that while this had started as a fight for water, it had become something far bigger. A reminder that communities can reclaim their dignity and strength, even after years of fear. And as long as water flowed, so too would hope. Early in the morning, Henry woke as the mist still hovered over the Texas fields, the air cool and calm after the long hot days. He poured himself a cup of coffee, stepped onto his porch, and sat in his old wooden chair. Duke lay curled at his feet, breathing softly in peaceful sleep. Before him, Crystal Lake shimmered in the dawn light, its surface still and reflective, mirroring the life Henry had lived. The harsh drought seasons, the sleepless nights worrying over crops, the silent conflicts between doing what was easy and doing what was right. Once, Henry believed being a good neighbor meant staying quiet, not causing trouble, keeping peace at all costs. But peace built on fear was never truly peace. The battle to reclaim water rights from Karen had never been just about water. It had been about fairness, trust, and the right of the community to hold its head high. Now, as he walked his fields and saw the green rows of corn, the water flowing steadily through the cooperative's pipes to small farms that had once lived in fear, Henry knew that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and every threat of lawsuits had been worth it. Because he finally understood what his grandfather once told him: water is life, and life belongs to those who respect it. In the evenings, people gathered on Henry's porch, bringing over pie, coffee, stories, and new dreams. They were no longer cautious, no longer afraid, but a true community bound together by trust and the promise of water shared fairly. Karen was gone, taking with her the empire she had built on greed, leaving behind a hard-learned lesson: real power isn't control, but trust, fairness, and shared respect. Henry looked out across the lake, a quiet smile forming on his lips. He was not young anymore, but with every breeze that passed, he felt alive, breathing alongside the land, witnessing a new generation growing up. Young people unafraid, heads held high, ready to defend what was right. And he knew that as long as water continued to flow through the cooperative's pipes, hope would continue to flow in the hearts of the farmers in this community. A future rooted in fairness, sustainability, and kindness was waiting for them. Henry took a slow sip of coffee, inhaling the scent of fresh grass, and gently said to Duke, "We did it, old friend." As the screen gently fades to the calm sunrise over Crystal Lake, soft instrumental music begins. Henry's voice, or your voiceover, speaks calmly: water is life, and life belongs to those who respect it. If this story moved you, remember, justice starts with each of us standing up for what's right, no matter how small we feel. A pause, letting viewers reflect. If you believe in stories that bring hope and justice, don't forget to hit the like button to help this story reach others who need it. A gentle bell sound as a like. animates softly on the screen. Subscribe for more stories like this, where ordinary people rise to reclaim dignity and community. A Subi screen button gently bounces on screen. And let me know in the comments, would you have made the same choices as Henry? Or what would you have done differently? As the music swells slightly, you close with, thank you for spending your time here today. May you always find your own strength, and may the water of hope never stop flowing in your life. A fade out with your channel logo. And see you in the next story.